Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining in at this time. I really appreciate it for taking out time for this discussion. This is such an important topic right now that we're dealing with the Black Lives Matter movement. That is all the things that are going on in the world regarding that. To all our Black friends, brothers and sisters, we're really sorry for what happened with George Floyd. We condemn the killing. We condemn any racial killings that is happening anywhere in the world. And we wanted to take this podium to step back and reflect on what we are doing as a society, and especially the South Asian culture, and to reflect on some of the intercultural and multicultural biases that we have in terms of that. And we want to take this opportunity to educate you guys. If you guys have any comments, anything to share, any examples, let us know. We can also add you on. Um, just to share this, that it might be a little uncomfortable to share some of the experiences, and I really appreciate all of the panelists who are here. It's something that requires a reflection from all of us, because there is a lot of racial bias within us that we need to cater. So it might be a little uncomfortable, but what I can say is, with every bit of uncomfort, there's going to be a lot of growth. So just keep that in mind, and hopefully we can take away some really good, helpful pointers that are going to help us to become better human beings and better citizens for the society as well. So we'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Khadija Ghias, and I am a biotech researcher. I live in San Francisco, California, and I'm also the co-founder of Mentors Now. It's a community mentorship organization that I help support. So stuff like this and other mentorship, is what we try to do within the community. So that's my introduction. I'll go ahead and ask my panelists to introduce themselves. Starting with Sarim.
Hi, this is Sarim. I'm from Pakistan. I'm currently the co-founder of a social enterprise known as Ghias. So what we're doing is that we're tackling urban inequality in Pakistan. So what we have seen in Pakistan is that in the urban cities, the haves of the society and the have-nots of society living very close together. And what we want to do is we want to bridge this inequality through our digital solution. And one of the things that we have actually focused on is that in urban inequality, there's also racial inequality. So, for example, in urban centers, the people who are living in better developed areas, they belong to a specific race, and the people who are living in the shanty towns and living in urban slums, they belong to a certain segment of the society. And what we're trying to do through our social enterprise is that we're trying to bridge this gap through a digital solution that allows crowdfunding and crowdsourcing of solutions on a proximity base. Apart from that, I'm the UNCTAD Youth Action Hub coordinator for Pakistan, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to work on sustainable development goals here in Pakistan with the work of the United Nations. That's just a short introduction.
Thank you. Megha, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, it'll be much, I think, less impressive introduction. I'm a British Indian, and my family is Hindu background. I did a politics undergraduate degree, and I'm a postgrad law student. I know Khadija from Parliamentors, which is a program that I interned at, and I met kind of Khadija, and I know Soleha's work as well through that.
Hi guys, I'm Sabrina. I'm a British Bengali, I guess. So we're from the same place, and yeah, not as impressive of those two there.
My name is Soleha, and by background, I've been working in gender violence for the past 13 or so years. In the context of your discussion, I specialise in supporting the BME community. So in terms of like sexual violence, domestic violence, that's sort of what I specialise in. I'm British Pakistani by background, and I'm a former parliamental from many, many years ago. Probably shouldn't say the year because then you'll know how old I am. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
So we're going to take, in terms of to show solidarity with our Black community, we want to take 1 minute of silence, just to, we cannot do anything about the killing right now, but we want to make sure that our Black brothers and sisters are heard and seen, and we'll just take 1 minute and PR condolences to the Black community. So the topic for today's discussion is methods to create dialogue to face intercultural and multicultural racism within the South Asian community. And before we really dive into the topic, I want to go ahead and define racism. What does racism mean? Many different cultures have different definition of racism. So by dictionary, what racism means is prejudice, discrimination, antagonism directed against someone of a different race, which means color, height, weight, based on a belief that one's own race is superior. And anything so racism can be in spectrum, right? And it can be mild racism, it can be extreme racism. Most of us in our community, we experience some level of racism. Either it's intercultural racism or racism from other communities to our community or from our community to other communities. And even if it's mild racism, we want to take a step back and really recognize what are the elements of racism that exist in our society, and be mindful of those interactions that we have, and what are some things that we can do in order to deal with in terms of creating awareness about some of these issues, and also having conversations about these. So we wanted to take this time to have a dialogue and create a dialogue about recognizing and creating awareness about racism and coming up with innovative solutions to deal with that in our own spheres, so that not a lot of people have to deal with this. And on an extreme level, nothing like George Floyd should happen again with any other race, Black community or any other community. This is not acceptable for humanity purposes. So I'll go ahead and I'll ask my panelist. I'll start off with Sarim, and I'll ask him, how do you define racism within the Pakistani community, and what are the examples that you might have for racism?
Thank you, Khadija. So you have already mentioned the textbook definition for racism, but I think that when we're talking about racism, we need to look at it through an assemblage perspective. So assemblage says that whatever we think, what we see, there are a lot of layers behind it. So for example, if you're seeing a wall, the wall has a lot of layers that you're unable to see because you're only seeing the physical appearance. And that is something that I think we need to do with racism as well. We need to go beyond what the textbook definition of racism tells us, and actually identify how this concept actually came to be, and how this concept was propagated in the modern world, and what are the historical contexts that led up to this ideology coming forward. And I think one of the things that happened in the last 50, 60 years was that we believed as a society that capitalism is the main socio-economic system that's going to save us, and this is how we allocate resources. And the problem with capitalism is that it rewards people based on accumulation of wealth or accumulation of resources. So when this concept came out that we need to accumulate more resources, then people thought that how do you define who is able to accumulate more resources and who's not able to accumulate more resources? And that is where the concept of racism actually started. And that's how the concept of colonialism also started, with accumulation of resources. So people in Europe started thinking that we as people are better, and we have the right to accumulate more resources, and it's our right to go into other countries and plunder their wealth and accumulate that wealth for ourselves. And that is how I think the starting of racism in our modern world started, because racism is closely tied to colonialism as well, because colonialism is one race actually dominating another. So my argument here is that this idea of accumulation of wealth started the concept of racism, and it started the concept of other races coming to other countries and dominating them. So that is a clear definition. That is something that the textbook definition of racism won't tell us. We need to do a historical perspective and see how this idea actually came to be. Apart from that, you specifically asked me that how is racism playing out its part in the Pakistani community or in the South Asian community. And that again, I think it's very important to tie it down to the initial thing that I started, the idea of capitalism and how one nation or race can accumulate more resources than the other one. And being from a post-colonial country, I have seen it played out in front of my eyes. So The concept of racism in Pakistan, what we need to understand is that it's an imported concept for us. So before in Pakistan or in the South Asian community, before the British Raj, the community itself was very homogeneous in a way that there was no racial bias and the community was not divided as it is divided right now. So through the British Raj actually emphasized on the idea of divide and conquer. And this idea of racism, one race being more superior than the other race, was introduced to us by the British colonials. Because if you read Born in Shadows, it's a book by a Pakistani author. She says that all of the conquerors that actually came to India before the British, all of them actually mingled with the Indians. So they had a lot of crossbreeding. There was no racial divide between them. And that is why the subcontinent is as diverse as it is. But the British were the only conquerors that came to India and said that, wait, we are different from you, we are superior than. And that is how the concept of racism started in the subcontinent. And that through the British Raj, there was this concept that the British are superior than us. And there was this concept that the British introduced, or divide and conquer, that some races within the subcontinent that were living peacefully before the British Raj are superior than other races. So, for example, when there were two institutions that the British used for controlling the subcontinent. The first was the bureaucracy, and the second was the army. And both of these institutions, when the British were recruiting people into them, they were looking for people who were people who used to look like them. So they were either fair, they were tall, and they knew good English. So this was a racial divide that was on an institutional basis, that the British telling us that, wait, we are ruling you, and the people we are selecting from you, they look like us. So these races from within you are also superior. And even after partition, these institutions, the British, the army and the bureaucracy in the subcontinent were very well developed. Even after independence, these institutions were still developed. So what happened was that this concept of racial superiority was left behind by the British in these institutions, which actually propagated the concept of racial inequality within the subcontinent. And I think, so that's just my take on how the subcontinent.
A very good point, because I'm listing two things here. Most importantly, the first thing is capitalism, right? Like money can buy you anything, and this is the divide that they've created within us. That if you're rich, you're light skinned, and you're more nicer, you're purer, and this is what you idealize to be. And if you're poor, you're dark, you don't have all the resources to take care of you probably, and that's like, you're not part of us, and you aspire to be rich and fair and light skinned, which is also it stems to another thing what Sarim mentioned, was post-colonialism, that we've been ruled by the Britishers, whose policy to integrate in our society was divide and rule, and the way they could do that was to create the divide in terms of our color, because that was the most evident thing that we can have. They're not better than anything else. Only thing that's different is the color. So they made a mindset that, okay, white is pure and nice and clean, and dark is ugly. So I want to ask my other panelists, and it's interesting to see, like, I have panelists from like everywhere in South Asia, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. I want to hear, like, how do you see racism existing within the Hindu society? Megha, I want to ask that, and then passing on to Sabrina and Soleha, I want to ask you, like, how do you see racism existing in the modern UK society, so the Western world? So Megha.
Yeah, so I would say, like, Sarim's introduction and when we look at, like, the textbook definition, what it doesn't take into account, as Sarim said, is that there are multiple structures in place that also propagate this cycle of racism. So you can have racism at your own unconscious personal bias level, which is what you think, and then you have it in your interpersonal, which is in terms of, say, your family and the people you interact with immediately. There can be racism within that. Then there can be systemic racism in the way, say, your workplace and the structures that are in place there. Then it can also be institutional with, say, politics and policies. And I think that for the longest time, racism has been used kind of, black versus white. Like, that's it. That's the basic definition, but it doesn't take into account all of the other factors that are in play. But if, like, within the South Asian community, one of the most, kind of basic questions that we have is, but if I am also brown, how can I be racist? This, like, idea that if I'm already on the colour spectrum, how can I be racist? And that fails to take into account that even within our societies, there are hierarchies and there are, say, social structures in place that benefit us at the detriment of other people. So within the South Asian community, how can we see this? I'd say I kind of want to talk about what I'm interested in so that I don't speak about the areas I don't know about. So I would say Bollywood definitely, which is a big, big part of, say, South Asian culture. And it's very dominant in terms of what we emphasize in mainstream media, which is, you know, fair heroines, light-skinned, beautiful women. That's where the emphasis is, and that's what we see on screen. And the colorism, we've heard so much backlash about, you know, these fair and lovely creams, and this emphasis to be lighter and to be whiter so that we can assimilate in that way. That's one of the ways. And then also when you ask me specifically in, say, like Hinduism or Hindu mythology, I find it very interesting because this is something that I didn't think about before, is that even when we watch like Ramayana, we see the whitewashing of, say, the characters. So like Ram, who's traditionally dark, is always portrayed as being lighter. And then Krishna as well, always being portrayed as lighter, even Shiva. And say when we speak, so I was reading Palace of Illusions, and that's, you know, the epic of Mahabharata, and then you have it from the female perspective, which is Draupadi, and there's so many references to the fact that she was beautiful despite the fact that she was dark. So this is something that, you know, it's in every level, it's in every aspect of South Asian community. Maybe that's just like a starting point.
Going back to Soleha, how would you describe racism within the UK or your own community?
I think it's institutional. Growing up, I was born in London, and so was my father. And my grandfather came here in, like, I don't know, the 60s, and racism was at its peak. My dad grew up in the 70s, and all that stuff was going on. So then racism was very ugly. I mean, obviously it's an ugly thing, but it was very physical. You could see it. I think racism has now changed in my generation, where it's still physical in some parts of the country, but you're more likely to experience it on a subliminal level. When you're going to apply for a job, they see your name is a little bit different, sounds different. There'll be certain biases. What I've experienced personally myself is ignorance in the field that I work in. So like I said, I want to talk about what I know, and I don't want to go into other areas that I don't know so much about. So working as a frontline domestic violence advisor, so I'm saying it really simplistically, that's what my job is in simple terms. And working with institutions like, I don't want to slag off the police, but particularly with the police, there are certain police stations or certain police officers that are not very good at recognizing diversity. It's not all police officers or all police stations, that some I've worked in haven't been so great. And the problem that they had is, like, if domestic violence is coming from an Asian community, they would see it as cultural, or they wouldn't really define it as domestic violence. Oh, it's an honor killing. It's not an honor killing. It was a domestic homicide. It's nothing to do with honor. But if the same case came from the Irish community or from a white community, and it is honor-based violence, because there is this misconception that honor is only Asian or Middle Eastern, they wouldn't call it honor-based violence. So that's the sort of ignorance I have experienced, and despite explaining it, they would say to me, "Oh, so why does it happen in your community?" I can't speak for all my community about why it happens. Yeah, it doesn't just happen in my community. I can't, as a Pakistani, say that all Pakistanis have honor-based violence in their communities. It just doesn't make any sense. But that is the perspective of some professionals, unfortunately, that I've had to work with. So coming back to your original question about how is it different, like I said, it's subliminal. It's very small comments like if you're working in a very white environment, for example, at work, you're fasting, or you don't eat pork or whatever. I'm making it very religious, but I don't mean to do that. Say I'm coming in with traditional clothes, it's like, why do you wear that? Are you not like hot in that? It's so bright and colourful. But they're not, they don't actually mean to be rude, but it is rude. Or like going to these events, sometimes I've been to award ceremonies, and I'll get a certain class of upper class white people saying to me, "Oh, you're quite exotic looking. Where are you from? Your English is very good." You know, they don't mean to be racist, but it's rude and it's ignorant. Or when they keep asking the classic question, where do you come from? And you're saying in which area, and then they keep insisting, and it becomes really awkward. And they're like, also, when did you move into this country? And it's like, I've never really been to Pakistan. I don't know much about it. So they find it really difficult to understand that. So that's the kind of racism I've experienced in my adult life. That's what I would say. It's changed now, people's attitudes.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you is that, so the example that you mentioned about domestic violence, that if it happens within the Asian community, it's domestic violence or honor killing, and if it happens within the white community, it's just abuse.
Yeah, I mean, there's more education happening around it now, sorry. There is more education happening around it, but that's a constant battle that we experience as caseworkers, trying to explain to people that it's not a cultural issue.
Right. Like something that happened about the honor killing case that happened with Tanvir Baloch that got a lot of media traction internationally. And, like one of the main things about that was, oh, this is happening in Pakistan. And a lot of people get asked this question that, oh, like, is this something that's common in South Asia or like honor killings? And that is that, stuff like this should not happen. Of course, it's not acceptable, but it's not a segment of the South Asian culture. It exists in many parts of the world, like what happened just in the US. Racism exists, or class divide exists, and stuff like that. And you cannot really just label them as, oh, this is like a South Asian thing or a Muslim thing. And all of us, like people living in the West or Muslim living in the West, have to deal with this question, like, are you okay? Do you wear hijab? They think that you're oppressed. So a lot of notions attached with racism that is directed towards the South Asian culture. But Sabrina, I want to ask you, like, how do you think as South Asians we subject other people to racism? How are we towards Black people? How are we toward other races?
Yeah, I feel like the South Asian standard to like Blacks and whites isn't really positive either, even though we do glorify whiter skin and what's the word? Look down on black skin, basically, like darker skin tone. And obviously, like probably every day girl, their mother or father probably doesn't want them to marry outside of their like culture. Probably, my father probably wants me to marry a Bengali. He wouldn't allow probably a Black person or a white person, and probably the same goes for you guys as well.
So what I'm hearing from her is that we have a cultural bias in people who we want to marry. And to that some extent, there is in a lot of cultures there is that hesitation to break that barrier and go in different cultures. But what I've experienced and when I've talked to other South Asians as well is that, okay, your first preference is to marry within your culture, your religion. Religion is a different thing. Religion beliefs. I'm keeping that aside because that's another topic in itself. The first priority is to marry within your culture. Your second priority, if not your own culture, is, okay, white people are okay. Then Black, it's like an absolute no for Black people. Is that like our whole mindset of, oh, we don't want our genes to be mixed with them, or how will the kids turn out, and all of that idea of, oh, they're going to be dark, they're going to have curly hair, and it's looked sorry to say, it's looked at with a lot of disgust, which is so sad. It's like you cannot categorize certain genes as good and nice and pure, and certain genes that are bad. Like, how do we do that as human beings when God created all of us in different colors and different nationalities? Everybody's a creation of God. And Sabrina, do you want to talk about that hadith that you mentioned? What Prophet said about discrimination?
Oh yeah, the hadith is that no Arab is better than a non-Arab, and no non-Arab is better than an Arab. No Black person is better than a white person, and no white person is better than a Black person, except in piety and righteousness.
Right. So this is a very important point that our religion, at least from a Muslim, speaking from a Muslim perspective, this is something that we reinforce, is that the way we look, or our cultures, or our height, whatever, does not supersede our religiosity level. And what God looks at is you as a person, not how you look. And that's why He created many people in different shades, right? Like I always give when so I teach at my Sunday school. I teach to like little first graders, second graders who are 6 and 7, and sometimes they ask me this question that, why are we different? Why did God want us to be different? Why couldn't we be like the white people that we're studying with? Or, like, why can't we all be similar? And the one example that we give them is that what if all the fruits in the world looked the same, or they all tasted the same? Would you have fun eating strawberries and then watermelon or like banana? Would you like that? So like explaining to kids in their own languages, right? Like God created different fruits in different sizes and shapes and colors with different tastes, is that wants diversity in the planet. And this is exactly for human race. Like we're all, we have a spectrum of color, different races, multicultural, so that we can enjoy the fruits of different culture and do that as an interchange. I want to take this topic and talk a little bit about like talking about how should we have these conversations with our kids. Like if we live in the West, or something that we do if we live in a South Asian world. So like if we live in Pakistan or India, how do we have these conversations with our kids to firstly make them aware that, oh, this is racism exists and this is something that is evident, and then how do we deal with that? And firstly, like I want to break this notion where a lot of Pakistanis or Indians or Bangladeshis have that, oh, if we live in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, we're not racist. Oh, racism is a Western world concept. But we need to realize that racism exists everywhere in different spheres of life in very minute ways. So firstly, like what are the aspects of racism that exist within us? And then how do we explain it to little kids and talk about it? So Sarim, can you talk about like racism that exists on grassroots level in Pakistan?
So I think in Pakistan, racism exists on a provincial level as well. So there's a lot of diversity. There's like a lot of races living together in Pakistan. Another thing that you talked about having an open conversation. So one of the things that's been missing in Pakistan is the conversation regarding identity. So how do you identify yourself? And that is something that's very tricky. And the state itself is very confused regarding what are you. So the state's narrative regarding identity is not very clear. That is in kind of a way that propagates racial inequality. So if you read history, there are a lot of people who call Pakistan as Punjabistan. So that is a clear saying that there is a lot of racial inequality. So one of the things that you mentioned, that you go to summer school, summer classes and teach kids, and I think that is a very solid foundation to build identity on. So one of the things that I do is that I use an identity pyramid. So whenever I go to these schools and I talk about identity, I tell them that your identity is not based on just one thing. Your identity is based on a lot of things. So I have this simple activity that there's like 5 provinces in Pakistan. It's 4 provinces, sorry. Punjab, Sindh, KPK, and Balochistan. So I asked the kids, so in Karachi, all of these 4 provinces come together. So I asked the kids, how many of you are from Punjab? And a couple of them raised their hands. And I asked them, how many of you are from Sindh? A couple of them raised their hands. And I go over all of the provinces. And then I asked them, how many of you are boys? And how many of you are girls? And boys and girls raised their hands. And I will ask them, how many of you are Muslims? And how many of you are non-Muslims? And a section of the class would raise their hands. And then I will ask them, how many of you are Pakistanis? And all of them would raise their hand. And I will ask them, how many of you are from the subcontinent? I will explain what the subcontinent is. But then everyone would raise their hands. And the last question that I always ask is that, how many of you are human beings? And again, everyone would raise their hands. And I think that is the kind of conversation that we should be having right now, that we should not be disregarding race, as you have mentioned, that if we all were just of the same color, then life would not be fun. What we need to understand is that we all have different identities and we have layers of identity. And every person is not just a textbook version of black and white. Even a black. So for one of the you asked that what are one of the things that we do that can propagate racism. So one of the things that we do is generalization. So when we talk about the whites, we just call them Gora. So whether they're from Europe or US, whenever a white is coming to Pakistan, you say Gore ne baat ki hai. So that is a generalization from our end. And the thing that we need to understand right now is that the concept of identity is not as simple as you portray. We need to break down our identities, and we need to have a conversation regarding identity building in our classrooms that can actually have a conversation that around racial inequality. And again, having a very well-built identity does not mean that you are a racist. That I am proud of being a Pakistani, but that does not mean that I'm actually negating another race. I can be proud of being a Pakistani and then be equally welcoming to other races. And I think that is a foundation that we need to build our identities. We need to inculcate the concept of identity building and then the concept of acceptance of other identities to build a more holistic community.
Right. So we have a question from one of our panelists, like, what do you define as identity? And this is something that I really liked what you said about your example, is that you make your kids aware of the different levels of identity that they have. So like how I'm thinking about it is like a hierarchy, right? Like you start off with a very basic level, like how you look, how you are, which family that you come from, what language that you speak, and it has a whole, like, India has is such a multicultural and multilingual nation, but they all come together as Indians, right? Even though most of them they cannot speak Hindi as their national language. So it's not about the language or your culture or your what kind of food do you make at home. It's okay to be aware of that, like you have your own identity and to be aware of that, but then to also put in their mind that we are above than our identity on a personal level. When we come to a classroom or we're talking with other people or we're sharing ideas, we're coming like as you said, like as a national identity or as a human identity. We're humans firstly, right? And then after that, all the different shades and colors and religions and languages and all these are all subcategories that is under that. But beyond this, we're just humans, and that's what we should consider. And one thing that I think that's very important that you mentioned here as well is teaching your kids to appreciate the diversity that is around you. If I am a Punjabi and I have a Sindhi friend, it's not that I cannot be friends with a Sindhi. I have to appreciate that diversity or the viewpoint that other person is bringing with them. And one thing that I learned when I first moved abroad was that agree to disagree. Is that you need to agree to the fact that it's okay to disagree. Like you might have a different set of opinion, but it's okay. That's how life is beautiful. Like when different opinion comes on board, which I agree. Like a lot of people would have issues with that on an institutional level, because this is something that is built on from an institutional level. And I would go on and I would like to ask Soleha, like this is something that's going on in the world, is that at least in the US, what I see is that, the fight against the police system, like, police is being very militarized, the trainings are going wrong. Like, I want to see and hear, like, from someone who has been part of the police force in the past, what are the things that we can talk about, like, in terms of the training of police, or, how can we make them less racial towards other people? And this is something that we should not only do in the West, but all across, right? Like in the subcontinent, our police should not discriminate someone on their identity or their language or what they're speaking. So Soleha, can you speak about institutional training? Your part of your institution.
Mm-hmm. So at the moment, from my experience, the police do have diversity training. They are trained on, to recognize color, to recognize race, and they're also trained on how to deal with people with disability and mental health needs as well. So, I think we're lucky that our police force is not bad as other countries. Our police force overall in the past hasn't had a great record. It has made mistakes even currently as well. There has been cases where there have mistakes, but I've been lucky enough to know mostly really good officers who are passionate about diversity. There's always one or two people that spoil it for everyone else in the force. But in terms of a domestic violence context, there are trainings now done by people like myself. When we go into a police station, we are the experts in that police station, and we talk to them about cultural issues and how culture can act as a barrier for someone accessing help, and how to read beyond culture and understand that there is a domestic situation going on and certain communities are impacted by violence in a different way. Not that they're not impacted, they're just going to have different impacts on them. And also to to move away from stereotypes as well. So bringing it back to the conversation about Black Lives Matter, there is this unfortunate stereotype of the angry Black woman. You know, when she is expressing herself, you know, that she's just going to get labeled as the angry Black woman. But they're not bothering to kind of, you know, look beyond that and see where is the anger stemming from, what's going on. So I think that's a stereotype, not just police, but in general, people need to move away from. The other institutional side of things is, I would say, approaching certain communities from a grassroots point of view. So it's coming back from the work that Sarim does at a grassroots level. We need to approach that here as well with communities. It's not enough just talking about communities and saying, yeah, you know, we appreciate your differences, you're different from us and all this. It's actually going into the communities, educating yourself, being around this kind of people, reading the literature, getting involved in other initiatives that are about activism, and not just staying in your own little comfortable cultural bubbles and just sitting there and being like, yeah, you know, we're okay, we support you guys, but then not knowing anything about their struggles. So that's what I would say we need to do more of. And the police, your question about the police do need to do more outreach work, they do need to do more grassroots work to understand certain communities and how they operate and what their barriers are. Because not everyone likes the police and doesn't want to talk to them. So the police need to make that step forward by working in those communities.
That's such an important point right now, and thank you for sharing that with us, because I never thought about that, like, diversity on an institution level. Like, if you see diversity, and I know that for certain institutions within, like, most South Asian countries, there is a small minority of seats for diversity, and the reason that they have that seat is that, you know, they just want to fill in the quota system. But if they make use of that diversity and allow that diversity to educate them and to train them, they can actually be more open-minded in terms of how to deal with people from different races. How, if they come across people, how are they supposed to handle the situation? Because, as you said, angry Black woman, I think that's a great example, because we hear that all the time. And these are the reasons why such aggressive actions like George Floyd happened, because if he has an image that has been created by the media, and then if he resists to sit in the police car, they just kill them, right? Instead of dealing with why is he being angry? Has he seen anyone in the past, you know, go through that experience and be deported for a long time, or like what is going on that is making that person react that way? And to be trained to deal with that is so important on all levels.
Well, in terms of, I just want to add to that, in terms of police action on people, what the police need to understand is that unfortunately they do have a record of things going wrong in terms of racial stuff. So if you look at the McPherson inquiry that happened, I think it was in the 80s, the Stephen Lawrence case and all that stuff that happened, those cases were iconic and actually put a light on the police that they do need to do more work on diversity. And the police have moved on from that, but they still have a lot of work to do. So when people are angry with them, it's coming from a certain perspective. So if my father was to deal with the police, or someone from his generation, there would be certain biases because they were not treated very nicely in the 70s by police officers, and those are not the first people they're going to go to if something goes wrong. So that's where that community dialogue happens with the police and communities.
Right. It's the facet of multicultural racism that exists in our society. I want to take a step back and talk about intercultural racism. We're getting some comments about some people telling about, they don't allow marriages within different races and all of that. So Megha, I want to hear from you, like, what do you think is the South Asian perspective? Like, log kya kahenge, the ideology, like my race is superior, and anything that is different or outside of that race is not good. And I couldn't go out of my bubble and my sphere.
I think that's just so with the whole log kya kahenge, it's this overwhelming value that we place on society's importance and what everyone else will say and how we should act, and we let that determine the things we say. And also sometimes, so if we see something happening, we don't take a stand because it's like, well, it doesn't directly affect me, so therefore I don't need to take a stand. And when you speak to people, they will always say something like, but it doesn't matter because I'm not racist, so I have absolved myself of any responsibility, rather than saying that it's not enough for you to not be passively not racist. And this is a discourse that we're having now, that you have to be actively anti-racist. Like, you being not racist doesn't change the fact that the system is still disproportionately racist. As in, we all have a duty to take some action to rectify the system as it is. So when we speak about, say, preferences in families in terms of who we should get married, it is very much still a colonial hangover to be like, marry someone with fairer skin, as we've already said, and that really pervades even in, say, second generation immigrants as well. So even though we migrate, we still have this kind of thing of, Indians marry Indians, or just. But then what it means to be an Indian is so diverse. So, for example, when I went to Durham, which is not a very diverse university, it was like seeing how many people classify themselves as Indian. I was quite amazed, because there's an Indo-Caribbean community as well that would classify themselves as Indian, or like third generation Indians in Mauritius, Seychelles, that if you think of Indians from India, we don't count them as Indians, or we don't think about it in that way. And then when we speak to them and we ask them, what kind of racism do you face? It's very interesting in our society when we watch, say, like the World Cup and West Indies is playing cricket, and we will support West Indies if they're playing England. But then if we're playing West Indies, you see people reverting back to, say, racial slurs. So like just this morning, Darren Sammy, who's like a West Indian cricketer, said some of the worst like racism he's faced is actually in the IPL when he plays in India. And he was like, oh, they just kept saying, kala, kala, kala. And I thought it was a good thing when it just means black man. Yeah. So it's kind of, I think we pick and choose bits that favor us and then reject them when we think it doesn't affect us. And that's just, there's a lot that's gone into that. So say in like the US, the system has been built to have a model minority myth that was propagated, to only take professionals from India or Pakistan or the South Asian continent and picture them as this is the ideal minority, this is what you should aspire to be, and pit them against black people that were brought in as slaves and disadvantaged and segregated at every single level. And then so we use that as well as a reason to stay silent. It's like, oh, we're not like them, we are this minority. And you see that it's not an American thing, it is in British politics as well. If you look at like the Vijh scandal, if you look at, say, Preeti Patel's politics or anything, is in every country it's present, and it's not enough to say like, oh, it's an Indian problem in India, or it's a US problem in US, or it's a British problem in, like, it's pervasive in every single aspect. And you have to recognize that before you have any kind of discourse.
Right. And one thing that we get to hear a lot is that, oh, the institutions are propagating divide, right? Well, our institutions are to be blamed. Our politicians are to be blamed. They are the ones who cause the racial bias. But I feel on a personal level that this is from a grassroots level. So what impact that I can have, so something like this, like the reason that we wanted to do this conversation is to create change within our own personal sphere, right? And the people that we can influence, like I can reflect on my actions, the racial bias that I have within me and my family, and then my outer friends and family circle. And if everybody starts to just address the problems that they have or the things that they're doing wrong, and probably take it to their family, train their kids, talk to their parents. If everybody starts to think like that, then we can handle this issue on a grassroots level. We would not have I feel like policy making, all of that, it still plays a very important role, and we cannot discredit that. But this has to come from within us. In reform or changes have to come within people and not just from the institutions, because no matter how much they preach or teach, if you're not practicing those, then it will always be racist. And Sabrina, I want to ask you, and this is something that we get a lot of and I want to bring this out because being a Muslim, something that we hear a lot is that, just our kind of Muslim is the right Muslim and we're going to Jannah. And then we have that bubble, like a Venn diagram. If you consider, okay, in a bubble, this is a big Venn diagram of Muslims, and then in the Venn diagram, this is your sect, and only this sect is destined for Jannah, and the rest, everybody. What do you think are some racial biases that exist within us as Muslims?
Oh, that's a very good question. I feel like people a lot of Sunnis have a lot of stigma towards Shia Muslims and Baha'i maybe. So they probably think that their way of doing things is wrong. etc. Everyone thinks Shias and Sunnis probably think like each other's wrong and that we can't get along. But in fact, everyone can get along. Like I have some Shia friends, I'd say I'm friends with, and I have Ahmadi friends as well, and they're persecuted a lot in Pakistan, aren't they?
Yeah.
The Ahmadiyya Muslims. And it's really sad to like hear when people aren't calling them Muslims, right? And it's really, and especially as like Muslims, we're supposed to like we still say that there's one God. We should be united as one.
Right.
We shouldn't be like this.
And just to enforce that, we're not debating about, like any specific sect is right or not. We're just trying to get that point out is that, we are no one to divide or like think that other people are wrong, right? Like we are only responsible for our own actions and what we're doing, and we are the ones who will be responsible for our actions, right? If other people have a certain point of difference, again, when it comes like we have to learn to agree to disagree. And any other sect which is different from us, even in the Hindu culture or like the Muslim culture or any subcontinent culture, if you have a religious belief that is different to you, it's okay to be different. And if you don't want them to come to be part of your personal circle, which is like marriages on all, like if that is a separate issue, but you cannot think of them as less human because they're not less human than you are. They're part of God's creation and they deserve to live and prosper as much as you do, and their beliefs and opinions or race does not define their existence in the world, which is important to remember. I want to get on to a very lighter note, which some of us consider to be lighter, but I don't think it's lighter. And I want all of you to touch base on this from your own experiences. Is that one important thing in terms of racism, when I think is jokes, right? Something that we all have in our own South Asian culture is like, we have these racist jokes that exist, whether it's against the Pathans in Pakistan, that they're dumb or silly, or like the Meme culture, or like, they're always miser and Jews, or it's about Kale, Mote log. How can we think about, or like, how can we, in terms of a society level, how can we come above the racist jokes or elements that we have? And I'll start with Sarim, and I want everybody to talk about this.
So there's this movie known as The Freedom Writers. So if any of you have seen it, so there's a scene in the movie where so it's a very racially diverse classroom, and one of the students is actually making a picture of a black man, and he's drawing the lips a little bit bigger than the entire face, and that is one of the stereotypes that is attached to black people. And the teacher actually gets a hold of this picture, and she calls it out, and she said that how many of you actually know about the Holocaust? And no one actually knew about it. And in that movie, she actually tells that the Holocaust actually started with pictures like these. Pictorial depictions of Jews that portrayed them with big noses, with people that are very fat because they have committed a lot of filth. So the entire Holocaust undeniably is one of the major atrocities that have taken place in the last 100 years. And that started with jokes. And that, I think, is very important when you're talking about this, when you're talking about how racial jokes can propagate into very extreme things, and we need to call them out on a very grassroots level. So that was an example. And how do you want to tackle that? I think that we need to give examples like the Holocaust. We need to give extreme examples, counter these jokes, tell them that this is wrong because this has actually led to a lot of horrible things happening in the past. And apart from that, these jokes actually instill a mental bias in our minds that actually affects a lot of physical things. So when we think about the jokes, we think that this is just a laugh that I am having, but that laugh is actually affecting your mental bias, and that mental bias is affecting the allocation of resources in our society. So that is very important, because at the start of my conversation, I said that capitalism and racial inequality is very well tied. So for example, if there is no racial inequality in the world, and you see right now the most of the people living in Africa are living below poverty. So if there is equal distribution of resources, so the people that are rich will have to give up their resources so that the people in Africa can rise above poverty. And that redistribution of resources would be beneficial for one race but not be beneficial for the other race. So I don't know if it's making sense for everyone, but what I'm trying to say is that if we are making a argument regarding racial equality, then the argument is also about equal distribution of resources within races, and the race that is in power or that has more resources at this point in time will have to forego those resources in order to have a more equitable society in place. And again, circling back to this point, jokes are the starting point of racial inequality anyway.
Jokes or just like normal culture, which you don't even think as harmful, like media, right? And Megha, do you want to talk about like the racial bias? And I think you touched base a little, but I want you to dive into the racial bias that exists in Bollywood, and you know how much that can actually sit in our subconscious level.
Yeah, so it's like there's this whole thing of being like, oh, but, you know, it's just a film or it's just a joke. Stop taking it so serious. So if you say something and you get accused of being like, oh, you can't take a joke, or it's just a little bit of fun. Why can't you lighten up? And I think that just comes again from a failure of seeing that it's only funny because of a certain power play, because of a power structure, and because you're in a position of power to find it funny. And it does just end up reinforce negative stereotypes. So again, like, I just don't understand in like the colorism in Bollywood. Whenever, so you have say like Alia Bhatt when she in Utta Punjab and she played, you know, someone from a lower caste background, they put brown face on her, and I don't understand what was the need for them to put her in dark skin just to show that she was playing a poorer person, or like Ranveer in Gully Boy, where I don't see why that is a need, and also just hiring more diverse actors as well. It's surely we are bored of hearing the same storyline. It's like middle class rich girl, like dark poor boy, they fall in love. Sure, it's time to have some more diverse conversations around that too. And then in the media, we're seeing, you know, like here in the UK, we're seeing so much negativity around, say, people going to Black Lives Matter protests now, and then how this will impact, say, coronavirus in 2 weeks, and what will be, you know, will there be a second wave? But no one is talking as much about the fact that people have been on beaches every single weekend. People have had VE Day parties. There was, you know, a conga. And it's just that kind of the way the media plays into, these are the people that are responsible, and look, this is the problem that they caused. And I think British media is kind of one of the worst. If you followed kind of the treatment of Meghan Markle as well when they got married versus the treatment that Kate Middleton received. Like, I just still remember this Daily Mail headline, and it was like, I think Prince Charles got Meghan an avocado, and it was like Meghan is responsible for, you know, farmers in Peru not having any money, versus when Kate Middleton got an avocado, and it was how William was a wonderful husband. It was just a very senile example, but it just works on so many different levels, and it's just reinforcing the stereotypes. So how do we break out of it? I just think it has to be through having conversations, being like, look, actually this isn't as funny as you think it is because of X, Y, Z. And then if you get the response of lighten up.
And I'm really happy that you mentioned that, right? Because this is something that I think every girl has in the South Asian culture has at least once in her lifetime heard about from other people, for her or other people, कि तुम गोरी नहीं हो, or like, you know, you should be fair. Or if you're not fair, or if you're not a doctor, then what are the prospects that are out there? तुम गोरी नहीं हो, तुम doctor नहीं हो, तुम्हारी क्या prospects हैं, right? And this is something that we have, like, ideal patli dubli gori doctor ladki is the ideal candidate for somebody to get married, right? And this is a stereotype that our boys grow up with, right? Like, they imagine that, oh, Katrina Kaif is gonna come with their hair flying, and you know, and which is like these are the examples that we cited from media. And I don't know, like, how many times, like, I have seen girls depressed because and applying like skin lightening creams and all of that. And this is a facet of racism. Like this is just blatantly out there, right? Like, it's not no common sense to understand this. So I want to ask, like, Sabrina and Soleha, like, you know, what are on a very mystic level, what are these elements that you see either in jokes or media that go and live on in our brains in a subconscious level? So Sabrina, I'd like to...
I definitely have some personal stories on this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know how, like, you get tanned, like, some people may say, oh my gosh, you've gotten darker, but they say it in like a negative way. You know what I mean? It's like tanning is okay. Tanning is just like a natural thing. I don't understand why you have to say, oh, you're a bit darker, you should be lighter. And I don't know which story I should go with, but this was when I was 16, and this girl was like 13. She was just like a random person, like another Bengali person. I think it was my uncle's Rishta or something, whatever. So I think we were in my garden, and I don't know where this came from, but she said to me, "Oh, you'd be so much prettier if you were fairer." I was just like, at that time, I was just 16. I was just like, I'd brush it off. And then a couple of years later, I brought it up to my friends, and they were like, Sabrina, that's a bit effed up. That's really bad. She shouldn't have said that. And yeah, I realized that was a really bad thing to say at the time. Well, not at the time, like now, obviously. And yeah.
Yeah, so just put it out there. I think this is so funny, but I think I've replied to someone. Is that I don't know if it was like a joke or something where they were like, "Oh, are you waiting for Prince Charming to marry?" And then I think I saw this somewhere. And I was like, "Yes, Meghan Markle. She was a black woman and she got Prince Harry. So it's not that you don't have the chances. But any time that you hear that, all the girls listening to us out there, like." Your skin color does not define the chances for you. Or like
dark skin is beautiful, isn't it?
Everybody is beautiful in every color, every feature, every body size. Everything is beautiful. And trust me, like there's a famous saying, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. And you will find that somebody who will look at you like that, and never discredit yourself. And even all the parents looking, hearing this, never discredit your child based on how they look. It's just inhumane. It's just actually saying that God, you made a mistake. And next time you say to your child that, oh, you don't have this, or like, firstly, it's your own product. So firstly, we all need to reflect. If we're saying something, they are a reflection of us. And secondly, we're saying to God that, oh God, you made a mistake. So be mindful of that. And so going on to Soleha, do you have any examples or anything that you'd like to share?
Me personally, I've experienced that I'm not light enough. I'm just halfway there, but I didn't quite make it. But I haven't experienced as much as others may have done. It's just been comments in passing. In terms of like in our casework, I have come across people who've had, because domestic violence is not just partner violence, it's family members as well who can be abusive towards you. It can be parents, it can be siblings, that sort of framework. And a lot of some of the cases dealing with, they were based on colorism. A lot of the harassment started from there. And in terms of intimate partner violence, it did start from colorism. If the woman is darker and the kids are also dark, and then she's had a lot of hell, like, oh, all the kids have gone towards you, they've gone dark like you. So some cases did have that element. Coming back to what Megha said about Bollywood as well, I've grown up watching the same films as my parents. So, from the 50s, 60s, they used a lot of blackface in Bollywood. That was portrayed, and they always showed them as savages and just these savage jungle people, and the actress would be in blonde hair, blue eyes. If you go back into the 50s, 60s movies, you will see some of those. The ones with, what's her name, Helen in them, Helen the dancer, I don't know her, but she was in those films, and she portrayed a lot of those classic white female sort of roles. And I think it all comes from the media. We can talk about changing ourselves, but we have the opportunity to have diversity around us. There are some places where that diversity is not available, so you cannot experience other cultures, other races, because of where you come from. So in that sense, I think media has a larger role to play in terms of films, and they need to take responsibility for all the biases and prejudices that are being fed into the community overall. The most recent example I could think of is I think it was in 2003. I don't know, Megha, if you know about this. There's like this massive outrage in India at the time over this air hostess ad. And in the ad, the girl is a really young girl. She's quite dark. And her father is really depressed and really distressed that she's not going to get a job because she's dark. But then she goes and uses this magic lightning cream, and then suddenly she has this amazing job as an air hostess. And this ad was slammed as being sexist and racist, rightly so. And it caused a huge storm, and it created a huge dialogue in India about it. I don't know what happened with that dialogue. I think it's still going on. And then later on in 2009, there was the Dark is Beautiful campaign by, I think it's called Women of Worth, who done it. So that campaign was successful, but now you've got like darker skin actresses kind of trying to like champion the cause, but then you've still got the likes of Disha Patani, Priyanka Chopra pushing the fairness creams, but then tweeting on Instagram or whatever that, you know, all colors are beautiful, but then you're making people feel inferior in their own skin. So I think change comes from media, particularly in our South Asian culture, needs to come from that. And it's only then we can start talking about it with our kids, because I think our elders still have those biases. I think we still have those biases because that's all we consume. Bollywood media is a big part of us growing up.
And like my one last question to all my panelists, and this is, I think, the most important question, is how do we encourage dialogue within our own family members or in our people in our extended family, like our chacha, mama, cousins, in a respectful and honorable way, and educate them about some of these topics? Because, you know, a lot of these elements of racism exist on a very, like, they're very minor streaks, and everybody can see them, like, you know, in conversations and jokes and media and all of that. But how do you call out them and still be respectful? Because I feel like one thing that we were talking earlier is that if you say something, if you call out an adult and say, oh, this is racist, or this is a racist joke that you're making, or you're making a racist comment, they just wear the hat of, oh, I'm an adult, like, you know, I'm older than you, I know everything, and you're being disrespectful to me. Disrespect is something that is very it's a very conveniently used word in the South Asian community. So how can we actually talk to people, let's say our older generation, and educate them? And I feel like a platform like this is a mean to do that, and our younger generation. And
in terms of how to speak, I think you kind of really have to pick and choose your battles, because I don't know. I feel like, where do I encounter, you know, some racism? It'll be like racism jokes, memes, whatever. It'll be on a WhatsApp chat with my 80 other group members, and it's sometimes about being like, is this really the most useful place that I can engage someone? Probably not. So I think it needs to be a conversation where you're having it in person, and you kind of have to feel like you can influence that other person. Otherwise, it could be a very frustrating experience for you. So it's about identifying who are the people in your life that you can meaningfully have a conversation with, and then kind of make them feel comfortable enough to talk about the things that maybe they're worried about, or the prejudices they've held, and point it out in a way that doesn't make them feel like you're attacking them. Because a lot of these topics are so sensitive and they're so well ingrained that, so, you know, like we were saying about people saying all lives matter and all this, and you can't always get angry because it is a place of ignorance. And while we shouldn't still be having these conversations, the point is that we are. So you have to develop some level of patience and see, can I actually have some meaningful conversation with this person based on what I know, and then have your facts, have your resources, and just be very consistent, because you're not going to change someone's mind overnight. You're not going to do it in one conversation. You have to be willing to make small concessions to what they say and have small debates for a very long period of time.
So I would like to just like conclude our conversation, and Sabrina and Soleha, I would like you to add any last words that you want to add, any suggestions or any tips raising kids, how to educate them, or like, you know, how to raise anti-racist kids, or, you know, just more aware or mindful kids, and how to have those conversations, or just any last messages going on, starting from Soleha.
So I'll make it really short and snappy. In terms of the first question about how do we speak to our elders, I think they're at the age where you need to show them rather than talk to them, because you need to undo all of that that's happened before in their years and their experiences. So a lot of our communities tend to focus on a cultural community group in the area. So try to get them involved in volunteering community activities, like a diverse community centre where they can meet other people from different backgrounds. That would open up their own perspective, and they'll slowly change their perspective themselves because they're meeting those people. Secondly, in terms of children, I'll give you an example of my own niece actually. She is 4 years old and she's at the age where she's going nursery. No, 3 years old, sorry. She's at the age where she's going nursery and stuff. And the way my sister has taught her about diversity is actually allowing her to recognize color and saying to her, look, you know, these people, they are from a different place in the world. They come from a different place and they do things differently from us. It doesn't mean they do it in a bad way. It's really simplistic language to use with a child because she's curious. She would say, oh, that's a nice dress. Why don't I have a dress like that? You know, it's just having those really simple day-to-day basic conversations, not actually sitting down with your kid because then your kid's going to get kind of scared, like, what are you talking about? But it needs to be a part of your daily language with your child. And also books as well, when you're reading them, have a diverse range of books from different authors. So what my sister does is that she has books. She's also got the standard Pakistani Muslim storybooks as well, but she's also got English literature to show her different backgrounds and also YouTube videos as well. They're very diverse. She watches everything from Polish to Spanish. I think it's kind of introducing it like that. Final messages would be keep yourself in check. It's like if you don't understand the culture, ask questions in a respectful way, enter their spaces respectfully with permission. And going into, for example, we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment. Don't go up to a black person and say, hey, what are your struggles? Don't do that. It's undermining. It's not nice. Go away. Go read literature. On Netflix right now, they have a whole bunch of documentaries on there. There's a list of films as well. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they're featuring 13th at the moment. And that talks about systematic racism. So watch those if you're not much of a reader. That's the final messages I would say.
Okay. I want to talk about more of the like elders, like Muslim elders in particular. You could just like tell them how some of our prophets were like black, like for example Moses and Jesus. They were actually black. Our black prophets. And Khadija, I want you to mention about Adam and Eve, like the science behind that.
Yeah, so I'm a biomedical scientist, so whatever I think in terms of like genetic perspective, and there is a very strong research that supports that the first human being on Earth was actually a black person, because black, like when you study the profile of black people, their genes have a range of diversity, which can offer like from a black color, it's easier for the melanin content to decrease and then eventually emerge as white people. So there's a very strong evidence that supports that the first human being was a black person, and that's how all we came from, what we came from. So just to conclude this point with that, is that, you know, we might have cousins or extended cousins who are black people, right? Who are even Africans, and just to embody that and think of yourself as a global human being rather than, oh, my language, my sect, my belief, and think of yourself part of a very big scheme of picture, because we're not going to be alive 100 years from now on, and somebody else would be leading beyond us, right? Regardless of their race. So just be mindful of who you are, what your interactions are with people. I think one thing that we can all take away, if one thing that my viewers can take away from this is that just do introspection. Think about all the things that you are doing that might be racist, and just call them out, address them within yourself, and respectfully address them within the circles around you. That is the only place that you have influence over, right? And also, like, we are all normal people in normal spheres of life who strongly feel about this issue, and everybody who's listening to us, they're not superheroes or, you know, saviors or politicians who are going to save us. We have to save ourselves, and we have to come up with innovative solutions to fight this race, to fight this war against racism. And anything like this is absolutely not acceptable that costs precious life, like it did for George Floyd and all the others. We really feel sorry for the Black community, and I don't really have words to explain that, because, you know, like, living in America, seeing all the protests and everything that's happening around me, I just feel so so empty right now, right? Like I just feel like what is happening with the world? What have we become? What have we evolved as human beings? Why have we become so harsh? I don't really have any words to say on that. So just this was our like very minor attempt to create awareness and change within our peer circle. If you feel that this has been helpful, share this. Create awareness. Talk to people. Have conversations. Be respectful. Respectful of yourself. Respectful of others. And just to conclude it, we are all fruits of life that the world has to offer us, and God has created us in different shapes, colors, and sizes. And just be there to appreciate that. And just would like to thank all my panelists from around the globe, Sarim in Pakistan, and all my other panelists from the UK who brought in really, really interesting perspectives from different South Asian cultures, experiences. I really, really appreciate this diversity, and I hope people benefit from this. And that's it. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Khadija.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to
Bye.
us.